In today's video, we're going to be talking about two of my personal favorite things: lighting and making mini documentaries. These are two things that I've been focusing a lot over the past couple of years, so hopefully I can share some of the information that I've learned. But before we start, I just want to mention today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is a fantastic educational platform with over 25,000 classes in all sorts of different subjects, from filmmaking to illustration, through to business to photography. There's pretty much anything on there, and I'll be talking more about that later on in the video. When it comes to lighting for mini documentaries, you're often presented with a number of challenges, simply because of the nature of a documentary. Generally speaking, you're not carrying around huge quantities of lights and you're not having loads of time to set up scenes and everything. Often you're working to a relatively tight schedule. You're not working in sets, so you're often on location, which means that occasionally they can be quite awkward. You're often working in small spaces or perhaps less than ideal conditions. And most importantly for us, we're often working in small teams. I mean, generally speaking, when we're making our mini documentaries, there's two of us. There's myself, who's behind the camera and trying to set up all the lighting. Then I also bring Vicky along and she helps me set up lights and just generally keep things organized, because otherwise the entire thing would just be a massive mess. So the way that I'm going to do this video is I'm going to run you through a handful of tips and tricks, and then we're going to move on to some proper lighting breakdowns where I take you through certain lighting setups that I used in different situations. So the first tip that I want to give you is that you often have more time than you think. This is something that I always fall foul to. I'm always rushing around, trying my best to set up lights, trying my best to set up the camera, trying to get everything done as quickly as possible, when in reality it would be more beneficial if I was to take it back a notch, maybe relax a little bit more, and then I'll probably end up doing a better job and I won't miss certain details. The only advice that I would give here is that you tell the people that you're filming exactly what's going on. So you let them know, hey, I'm doing a lighting setup here. It's probably going to take about 20 minutes, so you're not currently needed, because otherwise they can kind of be stuck in that limbo stage where they don't know whether they need to be there or whether they can go away and relax for a little while. The next tip is that natural light is definitely your friend. If you can use that effectively in your mini documentaries, then that's going to massively help you out. And in a number of situations that we've had in the past, it's actually been the best option to use natural light, and we either use it 100% on its own, or perhaps we modify it by putting it through diffusers or balancing it in some way, or we use it as our key light and then mix in a handful of other smaller lights in certain scenes. And actually, following on really nicely from that, one way that we can make our subjects look a little bit more cinematic, I guess, is to make use of hot edges. So you can see that light back there is giving me a hot edge on the side of my face, just a really bright edge there, and it separates me from the background and also gives the side of my face a little bit more shape. I'm also mixing up color temperatures, so I've got a daylight color temperature light up here, whereas this light back here is of tungsten color temperature, so you get that kind of shift in colors between the blue and the orange. And then also, I mean, a general cinematography tip is that it tends to be good to point the shadowy side of the face towards the camera. That way you just get the nice wraparound of light, you get the details coming across it, and it tends to just look better if you have the shadows pointing at the camera. Because if you just point the lit side of the face towards the camera, then it's going to look very flat without too much depth. And now onto what I would describe as being my biggest revelation when it comes to making these mini documentaries. Something that I've recently discovered within the past 6 months is that small lights are the best things ever. Now this is just an Amazon bought light. It's relatively cheap. I have 5 of them, and honestly I think I might order 5 more, because there's no cables, it's all battery powered, it's relatively bright, it's got 2 different color temperatures to it, and you can stuff them anywhere. You can gaffer tape them to the ceiling, you can stuff them in between books on a bookshelf, you can balance them in places where you wouldn't be able to fit a regular big light. That is what is so handy about them. You can just chuck them anywhere. You don't have to worry about bringing in massive lighting stands and having to worry about plug sockets and everything like that. You can just chuck it there and start filming. And as someone who makes mini documentaries in a relatively run and gun style, that sort of thing is invaluable to me. This scene is from a mini documentary that I'm currently in the process of working on. We've got David sat here in his small studio working on a little model car right here. And the first thing that I wanted to do is brighten up the entire space uniformly, because otherwise all of the shadows would have been incredibly dark and we would have lost all detail in them. So I grabbed the Aperture 120D, I put that outside the door, I put a diffuser in the door, and that is shining daylight color temperature light in this sort of direction. So it's brightening up all of these areas very subtly, just so we have some detail. Then we mix in all of the tungsten light sources. Now obviously we've got a tungsten practical light right here, but that wasn't actually that bright in the grand scheme of things. So I grabbed one of those Amazon lights and just balanced it on a bookshelf, and that's giving this kind of nice edge around the front of David's face, and it's also brightening up all of this area here. And then another light that we used is just another one of those strip lights balanced on a bookshelf somewhere around about here, just to bring some light to the back of his head, because otherwise all of this just looked like a massive blob. This next scene is from the British Racing Green mini documentary with Peter Morley discussing his old vintage racing Bentleys, and in typical English fashion it was overcast on that day, which is brilliant for filmmaking because that is essentially a gigantic soft light. So that daylight colour temperature was filling up all of this area here and also was lighting up this section of Peter Morley's face and also giving him really nice catch lights, so I was very happy with that. But we placed him next to his workshop so that we could get a contrast ratio across his face, so we could get the shadowy side here, but the shadows were way too strong. If you see this area down here, that's pretty much what it was like throughout this entire side of his face. So we fixed that by getting Vicky to stand next to or slightly off of camera, slightly just over here, with one of those Amazon lights, the little strip lights, and she was just holding it, pointing it in this direction, slightly brightening up this side of the face and also warming it up a tiny bit, getting that shift of colour temperatures. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now for this final scene, we have got Desiderio Labajo from our mini documentary in the Philippines, and in this one we didn't use any lights because we were on a tiny fishing boat. There was no way we were going to be able to bring lights on there, so we had to make do with what we had, and what we had wasn't great. The sun was shining directly downwards like this. It was midday, so we were dealing with very harsh shadows. We would end up with situations like this where we would get shadows underneath the eyes, shadows underneath the nose, shadows pretty much everywhere, harsh shadows all over the place. So we got around that by using the hat. So obviously that negated a lot of the shadows on his face, so we still keep that nice soft look. And then one thing that I'm not going to pretend was on purpose was that I was wearing a relatively bright t-shirt, and that was actually bouncing a lot of the light back up onto Desiderio's face, keeping it nicely lit. Now, as I say, this wasn't intentional. However, if I was wearing a dark t-shirt and I noticed that his face was looking a little bit too shaded, then I would have used something like a white sheet or a 5-in-1 to just reflect some of that light back up, just to keep everything balanced. Now, the chances are if you enjoy this sort of content, you'll like the content that's on Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in pretty much everything, from filmmaking to photography to graphic design to business. And a premium membership gives you unlimited access to all of those classes, so you can find the perfect one for you. Whether you want to just fuel your curiosity or potentially learn new skills that could lead to a new career. Now, Skillshare is also super affordable with an annual subscription costing less than $10 a month. And the good news is that the first 500 people to click the link in the description will get 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. That, my friends, is a lot of free classes. One that I personally enjoy is Cinematography Basics, Understanding Filmmaking Style by Zach Mulligan, who's a cinematographer. He goes into detail about how he shot certain scenes, but the thing that I found most valuable was his explanation of cinema's visual language and building up a cinematic toolkit. There are details that he explained in there that I never would have thought of, and they're things that I'm going to be taking forward into my future projects, so it genuinely was very valuable for me. So once again, the first 500 people to click on the link in the description get 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free, so head down there and check it out. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you again soon.